Okay, with that, we'll get started. The topic for today is electrical safety testing, and we're going to go back to the basics a little bit just to remind ourselves why we're doing the electrical safety testing, and how important it is and what we should be thinking about. So we'll talk a little bit about why electrical safety testing is important to reduce the risk of injury or death to the patient, what has changed in the international electrical safety standards and NFPA 99. And the reason we're going to talk about both is because while the most of us use NFPA 99 in the United States, in Canada and Latin America, all the way to the tip of South America, it's the international standards that matter. So we'll talk about both and give you some perspective on that. We'll also treat you to some tips and tricks about electrical safety testing that we hope are important to you. So we'll start off with a question, a poll question. Which kind of electrical shock is not felt? Is it microshock or macroshock? Edna, would you launch the poll?
You got it, Jerry. And that first poll question has been launched. And we will give participants about 30 seconds to enter their responses. Thanks, everyone, for your participation. Responses are coming in, Jerry. And I know you're going to be very interested to see the results from this.
Oh,
so I'll
yeah.
share in a second. Yeah, very exciting. Okay, responses are in and the poll is now closing, and I'll share those results. So we got 84% indicated microshock and 16% indicated macroshock.
Well, that's interesting. So probably that's due to our mix of people, some students and some less experienced people, and then more of our more experienced people that have been through this particular topic many times. So we think microshock is the kind that is not felt. And let me tell you just a brief little story about that. As we move on to the nature and impact of electrical shock, back in the 1960s-ish, when we first started introducing more and more medical devices like patient monitors and defibrillators that were plugged into the mains or wall current, in the United States, we saw an increase, a dramatic increase in deaths for patients who had indwelling catheters. So these are like patients where we had a cardiac output catheter sitting right in the heart, or something like that, or doing a Swan-Ganz maneuver to evaluate what was the pulmonary arterial blood pressure. And nobody could quite figure out why, because we believed that these electromedical devices were relatively safe. So it got pretty bad, and there was an investigative reporter that you may or may not have heard of before, very famous in the US, Mr. Ralph Nader. He is famous for the Chevy Corvair investigative reporting he did, but he got a hold of this information, and he decided that he was going to try and make the issue, create better awareness of the issue. So rather than publishing his article in the newspaper or a peer review or clinical or technical journal, he published it in the Ladies' Home Journal. Why? Because he had the idea that if mama's not happy, nobody's happy, and the women in the country were more likely to put pressure in a different way on people who could make something happen. And indeed, that was a good decision on his part, because it caused the United States to get funding for a very big study to try and figure out what is the root cause here. And that was funded by the Kellogg family, famous of the Kellogg's cornflakes um, product. And that was in the early 70s, just when I was coming into biomed. And as a result of that, we discovered this thing called microshock. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how important it is as we go through the rest of this presentation. But you'll notice macroshock, that is the shocks that you can feel, can kill you just like microshock can kill you. So you can see the range of currents, leakage currents or shock currents that can harm you. Mild shock, muscle contraction where you can no longer let go of the conductor, severe shock which paralyzes your diaphragm, keeps it contracted so you can't breathe, and that also the current being big enough that it overwhelms your heart electrical activity and puts you into fibrillation. So all of these are possibilities, not only with microshock, but also with macroshock. So electricity can be dangerous, and that's why we need to make the measurements. So we know we need to make the measurements. So the next poll question is, how often do you perform electrical safety tests on all your electromedical devices? Do you do it at least once per year? And you could answer yes, no, or you don't know. But let's see, Edna, kind of what everybody is thinking.
And that poll question, Jerry, has been launched. Responses are coming in. We'll give attendees about another 15 seconds to enter their response. Okay, and the poll is now closing. And I'll share the results. 75% indicated yes, and 25% indicated no.
Okay. Any I don't knows?
No.
Wow.
No.
Okay. Well, so if you answered no, I'm kind of not quite sure why it's no. It should be yes, at least annually. So we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk about NFPA 99. And actually, annually is not the only times we do electrical safety testing. And we'll talk a little bit more about the other two situations that can occur where measurements are required for electrical safety tests. So, as I said, due to this big study, we discovered that anything that we plug into the wall, actually anything that operates on electrical power, can produce sufficient leakage current that if it's introduced directly into the heart, will cause injury or death on the patient. So it's really important that we test hospital beds, the surrounding environment, ECG leads, or other kinds of continuously conductive patient connections, transesophageal echocardiographic probes, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later, and many others. So even if it's battery powered, it still can produce enough leakage current that it can harm the patient. So we need to really do these tests. So let's talk about some situations. If we are working for the manufacturer of a medical device, then electrical safety needs to be done during the design validation of a new product that they're going to put out on the market, and they need to verify that it's not going to cause too high a leakage current to begin with. That's also called type testing. And then also in their final assembly test in the factory, electrical safety testing needs to be done, because that's the first time that all of the parts, the sub-assemblies and components are assembled into one medical device. And so each one of those needs to be tested for electrical safety in the final assembly test in the factory. Aside from that, for the hospital, we have acceptance testing, and there's two scenarios there. The first one is when a medical device is brand new and comes into us before we put it into clinical use, we need to do electrical safety measurements during that time period also, and then certainly once per year in our routine testing. But the second acceptance testing scenario is if we send a medical device away from our hospital or client facility for someone else to repair, when it comes back in, we need to do another acceptance test that includes measurements for electrical safety just to verify it's safe and effective for clinical use. And then certainly after any repair that we do ourselves in-house, we need to perform electrical safety testing again before we put that medical device back into clinical use. So when do you perform electrical safety measurements? Now, electrical safety testing and electrical safety measurements may be different. We'll talk about that under NFPA 99. But when do you perform electrical safety measurements? Incoming inspection of new equipment, as part of scheduled performance verifications, or after any repair or modification where the chassis is opened. And this is multiple response, so you can pick more than one here. So please, Edna, launch this poll question.
And that poll question has been launched, Jerry. Responses are coming in. And I want to say we do appreciate everyone's participation in our poll questions because it really helps us with planning future webinars as well. I'm going to give attendees about another 30 seconds to enter their response, and then I'll close the poll and share. Okay, Jerry, the poll is now closing, and I'll share the responses. So 96% indicated A, 94% indicated B, 93% indicated C, and 15% indicated D.
D, oh, wait, sorry. When you return it to the manufacturer. My bad, but some of you caught it and you responded. Very good results. So you guys are listening. You're hearing not only us, but lots of other people talking about electrical safety, and you get it. And I'm very happy about that. This really makes me proud of you. So let's talk a little bit about the standards. So as I said, in the United States, the biggest majority of us, when we ask what is the standard that you use for your electrical safety testing, we will respond NFPA 99. But let me talk a little bit more about NFPA 99, and we'll talk more about it as we go through this presentation. NFPA is the National Fire Protection Agency in the United States. NFPA's job is to worry about things that cause electrical fires or fires of any kind. And in the case of NFPA 99, it is a code. It is not a standard. So what's the difference? Well, we treat it as a de facto standard, but it's really a code, and it's a code to help NFPA make sure that we reduce any cause that anything that would cause an electrical fire. So they're not really focused on risk of injury to the patient aside from fire. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. Everywhere else, Canada, Mexico, all of South America. Uh, um, we care more about the international standards, and we'll talk a little bit more about to whom each of these apply. Now, I want to also remind us of two things. Number one, when we talk about electrical safety and we're talking about the IEC 60601-1, it is important to use that whole name. And the reason for this is the IEC, the International Minimum Performance and Safety Standards for all categories of medical devices, fall under an umbrella called IEC 60601. So if you shortcut and say IEC 60601 and you're talking to me, I'm thinking you're talking about the big umbrella. If you're really talking about the electrical safety, then I need you to say and clarify IEC 60601-1. That tells me immediately you're talking about electrical safety, not everything under the umbrella. Okay, so don't get lazy here. Use the full term, the full name of the thing. The other standard that falls underneath that umbrella is the IEC 62353, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. Third one, IEC 61010, really is about clinical laboratory equipment. And once again, we'll talk more about that as we go through this presentation. It also falls underneath the IEC 60601 umbrella. All right, so just so we clarify, what are the standards that guide how we do the tests and what are the testing limits for each of the tests that we're going to do when we make measurements about electrical safety. So who should use the IEC 60601-1? Well, it certainly is written for medical device manufacturers for design type testing and their design validation testing before they make their medical device ready for the factory. They also use the IEC 60601-1 in production in the final assembly testing, as I've mentioned earlier. For the hospital, it's not wrong to use IEC 60601-1 for incoming inspection or acceptance testing. And remember, there's two situations there. When a medical device is brand new before we put it into clinical use. And the second situation is when we have sent a medical device away for someone else to repair, when it comes back, we need to do another electrical safety test, including measurements, to make sure it's still safe and effective for use before we return it to clinical use. So those are who the IEC 60601-1 are really written for, and it's mostly the manufacturer. Now, there are some changes that I want to highlight here from the second edition of IEC 60601-1 to the third edition. And the third edition was originally published in 2005, believe it or not. But we still all are a little confused or maybe using the older second edition. So there's some things that you need to understand. In the third edition, they changed the name of what we used to call enclosure leakage or chassis leakage current testing to the name touch current. And it's touch current because what we're trying to measure here is a what if. What if the patient accidentally touches the medical device that they're connected to? All right. What if the nurse or the doctor touches that medical device and while they're touching the patient? Is there a current flow there that could be a problem? And if it is, where is that current flowing and how much is flowing? And so that's why we call it touch current. It's the same test, exactly the same requirements as we had for enclosure leakage or chassis leakage. Same thing. So what must be done? If it's a class 1 without a protective earth test point, a class 2 or even a class IP, which means internal power. This test must be done to a test point, a conductive test point, not grounded or not earthed within the reach of the patient or the clinician. It has to mean, that means that you have to move your test lead away from the protective earth or ground test point to this other conductive but not grounded test point where the patient could touch it. Well, okay, so if we really understand that and we really do move that test lead, which by the way, an awful lot of us are not moving the test lead. Hello, you're not doing the test right if you're not moving the test lead. But today, more and more of the medical devices are completely covered in plastic. In fact, even some class 1 medical devices no longer have a protective earth test point for us to use. And we're not allowed to open up the chassis of the medical device to find a ground or a test point, nor are we allowed to go use some other ground which we don't know it relates to the medical device or not. So it's important that we know that we need to move the test lead and how to do that. But because these things are all wrapped in plastic and there's no conductive, not earthed test point to be able to find, then we still have to do this test. And the way that the standards tell us to do this test is to use aluminum foil and tape it down and connect our test lead to the aluminum foil. Well, let's talk about why that is. We are all, first of all, we need to recognize human beings are all conductors. We are not insulators when it comes to electrical current flow. So we have inside the medical device, all wrapped in plastic, no other conductive test points to use, we have conductors and current flowing. Then we have this plastic chassis that is an insulator. So whenever the patient or the clinician touches that medical device and touches the patient, there will be a current flow. And we must know how much, where is it flowing, and under several different conditions. We have to know that. So if you think about your electronics training, there's a component, an electronic component that is formed by a conductor, an insulator, and another conductor. That's called a capacitor. And in fact, that's actually what we create when we have current flow inside the insulator plastic, and then a human being conductor touching the outside of it. We have produced a capacitor, and there will be a capacitively coupled current. And we have to make that measurement. Even if we can't make any other measurement, this measurement must be done, must be done. It may be the only leakage current that we're able to actually measure on this particular medical device. So how do you do that? This aluminum foil, about a 4-inch square of aluminum foil, 2 or 3 thicknesses so it doesn't tear. You wrap the edges together, then put it in really good close contact with the touchable surface of the medical device and tape it down. So you can see in the picture here, we have done just that on this particular patient monitor. And then we connect our measurement lead to the aluminum foil. And now we are able to see on our electrical safety analyzer exactly how much leakage current is available when the patient touches it or the clinician touches it and touches the patient. So we're going to test this in normal condition and normal polarity and reverse polarity. We're going to perform the single fault tests. First open the neutral or L2 and then restore that and open the ground. And we're going to see what is the worst case leakage current and under what condition do we find that. It has to be done. So this is an example of how you do that. Now, to help put put an exclamation point on this. Our other good friend and colleague, Mr. Justin Ross, has provided a video that we have linked in the chat. So you want to look at the chat and later make sure that you follow that link to the video that shows Justin doing this test. And then there's another one about ultrasound that we'll get to a little bit later. All right, so what about this other standard, IEC 62353? The IEC 62353 is used in after the either during or after the acceptance testing. In other words, when we receive the unit, it's perfectly appropriate for us to use one of the 3 testing methods described in IEC 62353. So it's appropriate for use by the medical device manufacturer field service or any third-party provider that is providing field service engineers to client sites. Also, all of us that are hospital-based biomeds, IEC 62353 is very appropriate. So we'll talk a little bit in a minute about a little bit more about this, but even in the United States, where most of us are saying NFPA 99, the IEC 62353 is just as quick. In fact, it's only a little bit more measurements required and collects the measurement for you than the NFPA 99 requires. And we'll talk. So NFPA 99 calls for. We'll talk about in just a minute. But so IEC 62353 is important because it reduces the number of tests and makes more and does not have tests in it that would tend to shorten the useful life of the medical device, which the IEC 60601-1 does have and needs to have, because why? This IEC 60601-1 is intended for design validation testing and factory final assembly testing. So it needs to have these extra tests in it because you're only going to do them once on a particular medical device. But the 62353 is intended for use for us to use ongoing, every year, after every repair, on incoming inspections, all of those situations where a medical device may be tested over and over and over, and measurements will be made for electrical safety. So that's the difference. And 62353 is therefore our friend and a very appropriate standard to use even under NFPA 99 because it more than satisfies the requirements for measurements in NFPA 99. So who should use NFPA 99? NFPA 99 is only in the United States, shouldn't be used outside the US, and it's intended for hospital biomeds and is fewer tests and less often. Because why? As I said before, the NFPA is about fire protection and verifying that reducing the risk of fire from electrical sources. So if we use 62353, we more than satisfy the NFPA 99. A lot of times in the United States, the reason we're going to NFPA 99 is because we believe that it is less of a burden on our limited biomedical engineer and technician staffs in most hospitals. And indeed, it is less burdensome, but it only requires measurements on incoming inspection, both kinds of incoming inspection, by the way, when product is new and when it's come back from repair. And then after any repair we do in-house. Otherwise, it's just a visual inspection, which may not be sufficient even on an annual basis We need the measurements in order to verify with objective, independent evidence that the medical device, from an electrical safety point of view, is safe and effective for clinical use. So please don't fool yourselves about NFPA 99 being sufficient. You can argue that really the 62353 is what you should be doing. And that would satisfy requirements from the manufacturer from the branded model specific service manual test procedure, where the manufacturer will tell you which standard they need you to use. And by the way, in the United States, the part of the government that reimburses your hospital for the cost of care for Medicare and Medicaid patients is saying, we're happy with NFPA 99, but we're also happy with IEC 62353. Okay, so you're not going to get in trouble with auditors who are coming in, not even the fire marshal, if you're doing at least the NFPA 99, and the 62353 is not more burdensome in terms of how long does it take to do the test. Believe me, it's just not. So be careful, be thoughtful, and follow the right thing. All right, Unchanged in NFPA 99, calibration frequency of your test instrument. The electrical safety test instrument shall be tested periodically, but not less than once per year for acceptable performance. That's your test equipment. So if you're doing NFPA 99 and you're not sending your test instrument out for calibration once per year, you're not really following this guideline. And on audit trail, it is discoverable. So we certainly provide that for our electrical safety analyzers and other test instruments that you may be using. And you can request, and you're well advised to request as found data, so you know whether it stayed in tolerance or not during the last calibration cycle. And also that you should request a traceable test report, not just a certificate of calibration, because in the complete report is reported the transfer standards or primary standards that were used during the factory calibration, and also the uncertainties of measurement for each and every test that's performed. And the uncertainties of measurement may add to the specification pass-fail criteria, and you may discover that calibration corrective action may be required sooner rather than you think. Moreover, if it's out of tolerance, it's discovered that your test is out of tolerance, you will need to go back and repeat every test you did from the last acceptable cal verification to this current one where you were out of tolerance. So annually is a requirement under the NFPA 99. So don't be fooled. Make sure you understand what's in there. Okay, so what changed in NFPA 99 since beginning in 2012? Lead leakage testing. So this would be lead to all other leads. Leads should be tested in parallel, all connected. The testing of individual leads is no longer required. You can short together all of the continuously conductive patient connections can be all shorted together and tested as one test lead. And before you go improvise something to help you do that, recognize that we do provide the 1 to 10 adapter that works with all our electrical safety analyzers that have the capability of testing patient connections. So that's the ESA 612, the 614, 615, and ESA 620. And you can use one or more of these depending on how many patient connections need to be tested. They're all shorted. This accessory shorts them all together, gives you one test lead coming off of it that you can connect to the lead posts at the top of the analyzer. So we provide, and we're here to help you. Other changes: patient care vicinity. and spaces. Where is this electromedical device in your hospital? And so the terminology in this definition has been changed in two distinct ways to previous editions of NFPA 99. The first is that the word room has changed to space in all instances. And this reflects a change that was made in Chapter 6 of NFPA 99, NFPA 70 to reflect that in a large room, like an operating room or a large treatment area, there may be different different locations for the medical equipment, and you need to make the tests in all of those places. And you'll note in the picture we're measuring from the floor 7.5 feet up from the floor and 6 feet in a 6-foot radius of each patient treatment area. So that's when measurements need to be made. These are the areas where the measurements, you need to document specific measurements and where in the room the medical device is located. All right, 2005 edition the 2012 edition of NFPA 99 eliminated the requirements for leakage current tests between each patient lead and ground, the lead isolation test, that's mains on applied parts, and the test of leakage current between one lead and all the other leads, non-isolated and isolated. So this decision was based on the effort to streamline regular testing requirements and ensure that the effort required provides a reasonable level of safety when it comes to what? Causes of electrical fire. That's what NFPA 99 cares about. And so to make sure that we test for everything that could injure the patient, we should use IEC 62353, and we will satisfy NFPA 99 and a little bit more to really make sure that patients are going to be safe. And I can't reiterate that more. I can't highlight it more. Well, what about big iron or other things like treadmills or floor centrifuges that may be permanently connected to mains power, or trying to do a test on an equipotentially grounded room or treatment location, where a dedicated ground runs from that room all the way down to a rod that actually is driven into the ground, so that that ground serves only that treatment area, and all metal surfaces, metally conductive surfaces are connected to that ground. So equipotential grounding throughout the room. And so the tests you need to do for that include voltage, resistance, and current tests for each location. And the room location matters. It's within 6 feet surrounding any patient treatment area. So in some operating rooms, you have the surgical table may be moving, not just changing in position, but moving physically to a slightly different location. There's a new area that we need to test within 6 feet, and we need to make sure there are no ground loops that could cause unknown leakage current to be flowing, because the patient is very vulnerable in those locations. So how do you do that? I mean, you've got a safety analyzer, you've got what, about a 3-foot test lead or 2. In this case, we're going to use point-to-point testing. So how are we going to make that happen? All right, well, the way we're going to make that happen is to use longer test leads. And we provide 50-foot test leads, specifically so that you can connect your ground to either that equipotential grounding point in the room or to a reference point, because we can't break into a permanent mains connection to get at ground, at a reference point that we choose, so that the measurements we make with our measurement lead are leakage current with respect to that reference point, which is not necessarily ground. And it's a valid way to do tests for permanently connected to mains devices like blanket warmers, treadmills, floor centrifuges, clinical laboratory devices, any X-ray system, and the like. So point-to-point testing, and we provide the longer test leads so you can get the job done. All right, now we're going to talk about testing ultrasound transducers, and this is another Justin Ross video that that I'd like for you to be able to see. So if we don't provide a link to both the videos I'm talking about, you can always go to flukebiomedical.com, to the Knowledge Center and video library, and you can search on ultrasound as a search word. You should be able to, it should pop up for you the videos that we have available for electrical safety here. Now, there's two ways to do this test. One is when the TEE, or transesophageal echocardiograph transducer, is connected to the diagnostic ultrasound system, and we're going to do electrical safety measurements on the entire system, including this very special patient connection. So let's talk about the risk of injury to the patient from a TEE probe. The TEE probe, or transducer, is inserted down the esophagus of the patient so that it sits behind the heart and images out from behind the heart to look at the heart valves and their function, among other things. So when that happens, you need to realize right behind the transducer face is 400 to 800 volts of electromotive force, EMF, that only needs a little bit of resistance to create a current flow, which is bigger than the heart's own electrical activity in terms of current. And it will interrupt that heart activity in very bad ways. So we really need to be sure that this TEE probe, connected to its medical device or not, is safe and effective for clinical use. So what could cause a problem here? Well, it's going down the esophagus, which means it has to go through the mouth. If it goes through the mouth, there's teeth, and the patient may bite down on the jacket, the external jacket surrounding that TEE probe, and bite through it. This happens all the time. So that can cause ingress of fluid, all kinds of fluid, inside the transducer, causing a problem. So we need to make this measurement, whether it's while it's connected to its diagnostic ultrasound system, or else during cleaning. The standard of care for transesophageal echocardiograph transducers and other diagnostic ultrasound transducers is that they should be cleaned between each patient use. And while they're being cleaned or disinfected, that's a perfect time to be able to run these tests, because that's a key situation wherein if the jacket has been bitten through, the bite through will allow the ingress of the cleaning solution, which is conductive, and that will provide short circuits inside the transducer. Not a good thing. So we will do testing of that transducer while it's being disinfected. Well, who does that testing? Is Biomed doing that testing and cleaning? No, it's central processing or the sonographer, depending on the location, a clinic or a hospital. And so we need to provide, these people are less technical than we biomeds, less well-trained technically. So we provide the ULT 800, which allows a pass-fail with a battery-powered device to keep the cleaning technician or sonographer safe if they put their hands in the cleaning solution during the testing, because it is a mains on applied part kind of a test to test lead isolation. So if the ULT 800 is a pass-fail device, there's no display of leakage current value. It's just, was it within the acceptable test limits, yes or no? If the answer is no, there's a failure on the ULT 800 display, and the central processing technician or the sonographer should call you, the biomed, for you to come up with your safety analyzer, repeat the test by putting your safety analyzer in place of the ULT 800 and making an actual leakage current measurement, which you will send along with that TEE probe to either on exchange for a new one or repaired one, or send it out for repair and get the same one back. Either of those scenarios needs the leakage current value to go along with the transducer when it's sent out for repair. So in order to do that, because the connections on the ULT are different from the connections along the top of the safety analyzer, we provide this little pigtail adapter, and you need two of them, one for your test lead and the other one for your transducer adapter, which is specific to the connector used for that transducer on its diagnostic ultrasound system. So it is not a standard connector. That's why you have to have a special one for even within a particular brand and model. There are different models and different connectors that are used. So that's an important thing to remember when you're testing during cleaning and you need a measurement in order to facilitate the repair. All right, so these are the two testing scenarios. There's a video about this, and I hope you'll take the time to visit that video. All right, want to learn more? Guess what? Advantage Training Center, Fluke Biomedical, the Knowledge Center, and then we have several options. There's Advantage Training, which I encourage you to make sure you are registered for. All of these things are free. Advantage Training, there's the recorded webinars, there's the video library, which has a host of other things for you to help improve your know-how and make you be able to do your job really, really well. There's also application notes, and there's also frequently asked questions, product specific for all of the products that we provide to you. These are all free, and you should take advantage of them, which is why we call it Advantage Training. And the Empower webinar series, because it empowers you to do your job very, very well. All right, thank you, and I think we're ready for Q&A.
Thanks, Jerry. Great job on the slides there. Really, really informative. And thanks, team, folks, for on the call and sending in your questions. We've got a lot of great questions to get through, so we'll just go ahead and jump in. The first question is can you give some examples of a Class 3 medical equipment?
There is no such thing as Class 3 when we talk about electrical safety. Class 3 is a US FDA classification about the medical device that is only used when they're evaluating whether they are cleared to market their product in the United States. There is no such thing as Class 3. Now, if what the person asking the question means is, what is Class IP, internal power, then I can answer the question. And that would be any medical device that is powered by its battery, and we need to do electrical leakage current when it's in battery, functioning on its battery, not through any battery charger or adapter going to mains. There are a host of them. So defibrillators, for example, infusion pumps, even some ventilators that have battery powered, especially for transport. Suction pumps that are intended for use in transport often are battery powered. So anything with a battery in it that is a medical device that's going to be used in clinical situations still needs to be tested. And that's class IP, not class 3.
Okay. Next question is, how can I use an ESA to test the conductivity of the cleaning solution when testing ultrasound transducers?
Now, that's a great question. You cannot use a standard ESA for that. The ULT 800 is a specific design for that cleaning technician, and it is designed with a conductivity test that needs to be run to make sure that the cleaning solution is sufficiently conductive. Because if they don't mix the cleaning solution dilution properly, they could have a less conductive solution than is required. And that also means that they're not properly mixing that disinfectant solution to do its job as a disinfectant. So first thing we do in that cleaning situation for TEE probes is we measure what is the conductivity of the solution. And again, it's a pass-fail. It either is conductive enough or not. And that's a special test lead. The electrical safety analyzers are not, they don't have the functionality to be able to do the conductivity test. So you can't. You would use the ULT 800 as part of that way of doing testing during disinfection of the TEE probe.
All right, next question. Does all medical equipment that use electricity require electrical safety testing?
Short answer, yes. Every single one.
Great. Next question is, how do I do electrical safety in an isolated power location?
Oh, this is a really good question. Only recently, in the last couple of years, have we gotten actual guidance from the auditors and from the standards committee about this. So when you have an isolated electrical power is an isolated power system, like in an operating room, some ICU rooms, and some emergency room treatment locations. When you have that isolated power system, it means that you are not, the ground pin does not connect to ground. It connects to the secondary of that isolation transformer feeding that room. The purpose of the isolated power system is to help protect the patient from ground seeking electrical current. What the problem is, all current is ground seeking, even if you think you fooled it by telling it, hey, your home is not ground, it's actually the secondary of the transformer. The current doesn't always know that. I'm making it simple, extremely simplified and humorous. But the point here is that you're not, if you use the ground in the mains receptacles inside that isolated power system, you're not testing the ground, you're testing to the secondary of the transformer. So the advice that we have now is that any medical device that can be removed from the room, you remove it and connect the power for that medical device to mains where the mains power is connected to ground. And you make the measurement that way because then you get all of the leakage current, not just part of it. And the other advice that we get is for those medical devices that cannot be removed from the room, that would be medical devices that are, for example, mounted to a pendant hanging from the ceiling or something like that. Then you bring a drop cord into the room that is connected outside the room to that grounded mains receptacle, and then you power the medical device that can't be removed from the room from that drop cord. And that's the advice that we get. And I know NFPA 99 and Joint Commission are all saying, hey, no drop cords, no extension cords, all of that. Okay, but then we get this specific advice about isolated power rooms where you are allowed to bring one drop cord into the room to make those measurements. And that's the way that you do it in an isolated room, and why.
Okay, perfect. We have just a couple more minutes, so we'll just do a couple more questions here. If the medical device doesn't have a metal post, how can I test it for electrical safety?
Okay, so we're talking about the protective earth uh, test, the test pin, to protect the accessible ground on a class 1 medical device. And as I said, not all class 1 medical devices actually have this pin, so it's a great question. If there's no accessible ground, we're not allowed to go use some other ground for testing the medical device for ground wire resistance or leakage to ground of any kind. Therefore, you cannot do the ground wire resistance, you cannot do leakage to ground, and you cannot do the applied parts to ground, which would be the patient continuously conductive patient connections. You can't, because you're not provided with the right test point to be able to use. But you must always do the touch current test. So you can't, if there's no ground pin, you're not allowed to go break open the chassis of the device looking for a ground. You're not allowed to go use some other ground, not. You just say can't do, and you may make provision for that in your policy statement about how you're going to do electrical safety because of these situational things that occur like this. But then you must always make sure you do the touch current test and do it properly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for sending in your questions. I think we got through all of those that were submitted, but if there are any other additional questions, please feel free to send us an email and we'll be sure to respond with an answer.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Jerry. Great webinar. And thanks to, once again, the attendees for your participation today.